Session 46. Good evening. I am pleased to see that our friend Mark has been fit to avail himself at last of my company. It is better to be late than not to arrive at all, and I shall most assuredly give him a most hearty welcome. We will have something to say to him before I am finished tonight. A note. The material was not distorted when Rupert gave the April 15th date in connection with Miss Callahan, and the crisis of which I spoke. Her ego has given up the struggle. It realizes that it will not be liquidated. Moments of lucidity will flash and die away. She is basically satisfied now, realizing from direct experience of her own that date involves a transformation, and if there is an ending in your terms, then there is also a new beginning. Rob asked, "Does Frank Watts know yet about what is happening to Miss Callahan now?" They said, "I certainly, most certainly, admire your interest and concern with Frank Watts. You always manage to bring him into a discussion. Frank Watts is aware now of Miss Callahan's condition, and he will be there to greet her. To her surprise, since our Frank always considered himself a friend of hers, although she was scarcely aware of his existence. Our witness, our Mark, has had many experiences, as far as what you call apparitions are concerned, and in his case, these have been of various types and he has seen them for various reasons. Obviously, to some degree, he has been able to use his inner senses. However many of the fragmentary apparitions that he has seen, for he has actually seen more fragmentary apparitions than he realizes, many of these have been fragmentary through his own inability to organize the material from the inner senses. That is, because he saw, in quotes, a partial apparition. This does not mean that the so-called apparition was in itself not whole. He only perceived part. His abilities are natively strong in his respect. What is needed is additional inner confidence, and even the development of inner discipline. The discipline, for Mark or for anyone else, is difficult to achieve. In that what is necessary is a passive discipline, rather than an aggressive discipline. The passive discipline allows for a fuller perception. It also helps prevent the conscious ego from snapping too quickly back, as is what happens often in Mark's case. This passive discipline also allows inner data enough durability to be realized. Mark needs to wait and listen longer when such experiences present themselves. He accepts them, but then, in an intellectual attempt to capture them, he smothers them to death. This one, that one, is one of your favorites, and one of Rupert's, and for that reason, I myself do feel a warmth. I would suggest that Mark also exercise himself in the use of psychological time. He should progress fairly rapidly. His impulsive nature is actually somewhat more restrained in this life than it was in the previously past life. Nevertheless, one of the problems for the personality is still the need for a more disciplined ego. 3 lives ago, Mark was content in a remarkably cruel and violent nature. He is now extremely kind to make up for past cruelties. In the immediately previous life, he was a woman, living in your own West, Midwest. He was erratic. You might say that Mark was too erratic to be erotic. He at that time was fairly wealthy and gave away much money in a subconscious attempt to make up for the aggressive and cruel male existence just previous. The choice in the past life of a woman's personality represented a somewhat understandable weakness on his part, and yet it also represented bravery in a sense. The impulsive and warm quality began with that Midwest existence as a woman. Through the erratic nature of the woman's personality, he was actually able to be much kinder. A male's personality at that point would have held too many temptations as far as over-aggressiveness and cruelty were concerned. Robert, can you tell us just where in the Midwest Bill lived in that life? They said, in the Midwest in the 1880s, in what is now Iowa, in a town which is now one of the major cities. He had 3 children. His present mother was a wife to him when he was overly aggressive, and he chose to be born as her son in this existence in order to pay an old debt. He was unkind to her when she was a wife to him, and here we run into another case where the subconscious knows what it knows. His mother now subconsciously remembers that earlier existence, and his unfeeling attitude as a husband. This is a beautiful example. Mark still attempts to override an earlier propensity toward insensitiveness, and is therefore now sensitive and impulsive. His present mother, remembering subconsciously past transgressions of his, now counts upon his impulsive nature and sensitivity to pay him back. This of course representing a mistake on her part, for which she will have to suffer the consequences in still another existence. Mark's whole family, in fact, have been in one way or another connected in a rather unusual manner through at least 3 successive existences, and the family of course has interchanged roles accordingly. They are still working out old problems, and in some cases are doing very well. There is also another member of this particular family who is presently a woman, and there is also another member who is presently a man. Neither of these 2 were intimately connected with Mark's family for the past 2 lives, and represent the only exception. The exception should interest you all. Do you have any idea, Joseph, who the 2 could be? Robert, why? Jane and me, I suppose. They said, sometimes you read me correctly. Mark was one of your children in the existence of which I have spoken. One of Mark's present brothers was a son of Mark when he was a woman in Iowa. Robert, which brother? They said, the oldest brother. Mark made an exceptionally good mother. I suggest that you take your break. I can see from your discussions that some short explanations are in order. On your part, Mark, Over-impulsiveness merely represents an overcompensation for early aggressiveness. There is certainly nothing wrong with being over-impulsive, but a discipline must also be established. You will be taken advantage of in many instances, because you are afraid to act even in a self-protective manner, because in the past, your actions result in violence. You feel an exceptionally strong empathy for your mother, since you subconsciously remember your previous treatment of her when she was your wife. You have more than compensated now for past errors, not only in this life, but in the previous life. Your painting is almost a direct result of a desire for creativity to balance what was once your destructive personality. The painting has its conception in intuition, which you achieved during your past life as a woman. However, discipline now becomes a necessity. The intuitions and the impulse behind your creativity must be disciplined if the creativity is to come to fruition. Art of any kind is extremely important as a way of paying off debts. That is, psychological debts. When you were a woman, marked, and wealthy, you gave away money. Now, like Joseph and Rupert, you give away parts of yourself, fragments of yourself, made more or less into living psychological forms that according to your ability are free from not only time, but free from many of the defects of your own present personality. You draw upon your own entity's hidden abilities and knowledge, and therefore transcend the limits of your own present personality. You are not only your present personality, you are the sum of all your personalities. This should be realized. Paintings, and for Rupert's benefit, poetry. I certainly don't want Rupert to feel neglected. But paintings have their own vitality and exist independently of the artist, and are the result of a spontaneous, free, impulsive burst of giving that asks no return. And as such, because no return is expected, returns are given. Any art form touches the generations. Karma can be worked out in many ways. And here again, we return to Mark's earlier male-oriented, aggressive personality. This time, through the creation of beauty in paintings, he more than makes up for past errors, not only because paintings certainly should possess beauty, but because they instill positive creative thoughts in the mind of the beholder. Mark's present family is composed of a peculiarly vivid meshwork of previous complications. The environment that has been beneficial as far as Mark is concerned thus far. However, the situations should now be altered. I suggest that you take your break. And again, by all means, let me complicate matters further by commenting on the fact that Rupert himself knew you, Joseph, twice before, and perhaps you will recall my comments upon your relationship with your son's mistresses in Denmark. Rob asked, "Who? Me?" They said, "There is quite a flashy story here, in which Mark was rather directly connected. There are few of your friends and acquaintances in this life with whom you were connected to a strong degree in past lives. Some acquaintances were in your circle in various lives, and merely happened to be born in a like situation to your own, because of problems that more or less corresponded to your own. Mark, however, was closely connected to you both, as was Randallin, R-E-N-D-A-L-I-N, who is now your Ed Robbins, not of this city. Take your break, by all means. I did want to make one comment of a light nature, concerning Rupert's unbounded joy with the new clothing which he has recently acquired. He goes by spurts and starts, being masculine for so many lives. He sometimes is quite bewildered by this quite familiar flurry, and I find it quite amusing. Ralph said, I thought you did. They said, the impulsiveness on Mark's part is in many ways an excellent and usable quality that can be built upon. But discipline of a mental and psychological nature must be used to give him direction, purpose, and a sense of continuity. In his case, this is extremely important. He has not married, and as a married bachelor many times myself, I applaud. Nevertheless, I will take it upon myself to point out part of the reason, which does have its own hilarious aspect, looked at from perhaps a more distant perspective than that of which Mark is now capable. For example, having as a mother a woman who has once been your wife is rather bewildering, and certainly can lead to all sorts of psychological uneasiness. Nevertheless, my sense of humor to the contrary, Mark is coming along extremely well. The earlier errors are being somewhat overcompensated for, but he will be the gainer in this respect. The complications latent in family relations are always dynamic and ever-changing. There is no reason to suppose that such problems are insoluble. And also remember that problems between such personalities are often solved through interaction with other personalities. I have said much along these lines in previous sessions, and Mark should refer to them. He was a sailor on a ship that carried exotic spices. The ship was mine. You, Joseph, were the pagey, her-chested, and the lecherous landowner, and the town was cheap. Your son was an artist, and certainly prances up and down now in the person of your Rupert, and at the time you had no understanding nor use for art as any man's profession, and let it be said that in this respect Rupert treats you much better than you treated him. Nevertheless, in a bar one October evening, a sailor came drunkenly tiptoeing from the fields. Mark being our tipsy sailor, he expected to find his fair damsel there in your son's arms, and he was quite prepared, having a knife in his belt. He heard the girl's nervous titter. She was a numbskull, hardly worth your notice, and he came rushing in, to find what? Not his contemporary, your son, but a barrel-chested, white-haired, and lecherous, lustful old geezer. Ralph asked, Who? Me? They said, You, in the act of deflowering the fair maiden, who incidentally had already been deflowered many times before. This story is truly one for the ages. You, Joseph, dropped your pretty parcel. This is for the record, so I shan't note the position in which you had her so tenderly enfolded. There was no light in the barn. Our friend Mark let out a bellowing shriek. You thought the intruder was your son, since the girl was one of his mistresses. In a truly laughable attempt to elicit your son's sympathy, you literally wept in your beard. Mark, when he realized who you were, then near strangled you. But there is a postscript. You went back into the house, weeping at your old man's fate. Mark grabbed the girl for one revengeful embrace. Rupert came across the sand fields with his horse, led the horse into the barn, and found Mark and his mistress. You told me this story the next morning, when both young men showed up with black eyes, and Mark with a broken wrist. But Mark, out of the goodness of his heart, never told your son who he found first in the barn. And of such small but tasty incidents in the history of the race composed. Ross said, I am in his debt. They said, you cannot appreciate the whole story, since consciously none of you can remember it. But at least I can get a good laugh at your expense. Ralph said, some laugh. They said, we have spoken about value extension and fulfillment as one of the laws of the inner universe. The reflection of this law is seen in reincarnation, evolution, and physical growth. As you mature and gain in knowledge, you do not obviously grow fatter. In other words, these qualities take up no space. They are not even visible in your space. Physical growth exists in terms of your sense of continuity, and therefore is projected into space and time. The evolving mind takes up no space. The personality takes up no space. You cannot look at it or feel it. You can merely see its results. In art, you manage sometimes to put into a framework of space something which usually has no existence in space. The crucifixion has no existence in space. It has no existence basically in time, in that it did not occur to any particular person, per se, at any particular time, per se. Nevertheless, it is a reality on your plane, and it exists within it, and within the framework of the crucifixion. There are inexhaustible truths still to be explored. Marked paintings of the crucifixion, like other such paintings, created a concept form, within which an unexpressible concept is transformed into expressible terms and placed within a spatial framework. The painting is in a room with 3 windows, in a large building. It was not stolen, but misplaced. The reasons are many. One of the main reasons is one that has to do with Mark's own personality and psychological make-up. He was attracted to the painting, and subconsciously he resented giving into the impulse of giving the painting to his mother. As a subconscious punishment, he allowed the painting to be lost through a series of small steps, errors and mistakes of his own and others. Rob asked, can you tell us where the painting is now? They said, the painting has been in the same place since it was removed from a show. There is a room with 3 windows, connected to a larger room in a public-type building in which men work. Rob asked, "Here in Elmira?" They said, "In this town. I suggest that you take your break." They said, "Mark's energy resources are scattered this evening. On another occasion, when he is in better control of them, doubtlessly we will be able to do better." His abilities are vibrant, but the discipline of which I spoke is needed to enable him to focus and concentrate his abilities along constructive and purposeful lines. I will upon another occasion go into his lost town, and some of his other experiences. It makes no difference how inner data is received. It can be as valid in a dream, or even more so, than in waking life. The lost town incident was extremely significant to him, and represented his subconscious projection of a memory from a past life upon the present. The town was indeed true. However, he projected only that portion of the town with which he was at one time intimately concerned. His name was Grant Grady, Grandgraley. Rob said, "That's an odd name." They said the family had been living in Denmark for 2 generations. He left for Spain at the age of 32. I will go into more of this material at another time. I covered it this evening by way of variety and diversion. Our next session will return to other material, as we have so much of our outline to be covered. I am pleased that you have been more faithful in your attempts to use psychological time, and I am most pleased, Joseph, with your development as a whole these past months. Rupert is over the system problems, with which I was quite concerned. I will close the session after a few brief remarks. May 23rd will represent another, and perhaps the last crisis as far as Miss Callahan is concerned. I would advise Mark to go ahead with his plans to find an apartment, but to look over all aspects of any particular apartment that he has in mind. Foreseeing difficulties of a temperament rather than practical nature with the landlord. This would have nothing to do with practical arrangements, but would rather be a more or less mutual antagonism that would rise up between them in a little time. As always, I hesitate to close the session. Perhaps I shall peek in now and then. With your permission, I also suggest that you keep an extra tape on him. Good night most fondly, and my regards to Mark. If he had brought more of himself with him tonight, then I could have been more help. I will speak to you Monday, if not before. Rob said, "Good night, Seth."